Why hello there, I am Shayna's the Potato, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Now you may remember I made another video a while back, Erton Theory Part 1, and I never really got around to making a follow-up for it for a decent amount of time, until now. Now, the reason it took me so long is because it took me a decent amount of time to get Erton Theory and my sixth-dimensional theory together in their mathematical form and have all those proofs organized, but I've finally gotten it done. After countless hours of stressfully writing and mathematically formulating, I eventually got the proofs to a point where they were pretty much perfected. This was an outstanding moment at the time, to say the least. Which was great, because now I can finally present the theory in its totality. No longer will I have to suffer those countless mathematical night terrors I dealt with before. I could finally move on to something different. God help me. Now here comes the next part, the math. Now, unlike in my usual videos where I just scream at the wall like a lunatic about derivatives and equations, I finally realized a change needed to be made in my explanation videos after seeing the views on the last one that I made, which made me quite sad, to say the least. But thankfully, after some time down at the crossbow range and some thinking it over, I finally realized what I needed to do to improve my explanation videos. So I have the theorem here, so I can finally go over it. So here we have the first proof up here. This proof essentially takes this equation, which is the equation for gravitational time dilation, and this equation, which is the equation for velocity-related time dilation. And it sums them together to prove that the two forms of time dilation are not equal to each other. And the reason it does that is to show that there are two different dimensions at work, which I believe the fifth and the sixth are. But before I explain that, what the heck even is time dilation? And time dilation is essentially where the speed of time slows down relative to an object. And like I said, there are two types. There's gravitational and velocity. Velocity time dilation is when you take a mass and you throw it, and as it moves, the faster it goes, the slower its relative time is going to be. Every time you move or go anywhere, your time is slowing relative to any place in the universe where the object is completely stagnant. Now, gravitational time dilation is when you take an object like this, for example, and place it here. Now, on a flat plane like this. The whole idea is that you have a smaller object with less mass, and you place it in. As it rolls down, its time slows down relative to everything else around it because it's traveling into that fourth dimension, which is set as time. But now here's the fun part. If you watched my initial Erton theory video, I believe time is the fifth dimension, not the fourth. So in my case, there's sort of another fabric that it bends in which it travels through time, and then there's a sixth dimension that affects that, which I'm going to go into later. Now that that's explained, we move on to the second part of the proof. This takes these two equations. This is Einstein's field equation for representing the curvature of space-time, and this is Newton's famous equation representing force of attraction between two objects in gravity. What this proof does is takes the two common variables in these two equations, which is g, or the gravitational constant, isolates the equations that they both equal g, makes them equivalent for each other, and when you solve the equations down, you can work your way back to Einstein's field equation through process of elimination. And you can do it the same way again, solving back for Newton's equation. Now, the fact that this is achievable between these two equations shows that there is a congruency between them, showing that gravity and the curvature of space-time are equal in how they function and have a clear relationship with each other, which is what I want to use to show that the fourth dimension is what bends and relates with gravity. Well, the fifth dimension is what bends and relates with time, and then there's the sixth dimension, which when bends, slows or speeds up time depending on where it's bending. But then, of course, there's also this bottom part of it. This part is the different part of the proof. This isn't proving my sixth-dimensional theory. It is proving Erton theory, showing that the space-time continuum is made up of little non-dimensional particles. And for that, we need to move on to the next part. Unfortunately, while I was filming, I received a call which related back to an experiment I did in my last theory video, which concerned me a bit to say the least. Thankfully, though, I took care of the problem quickly and effortlessly and had enough time to make it back home. I arrived a bit abruptly, but I wanted to make sure no one saw me in the moment. Thankfully, though, when I'm stressed out, I always know what to do to calm me down. So I held a mock trial with my Angry Birds plushes. This one's on trial for manslaughter. Then I realized I'm mentally insane. Alright, so here we have the second proof, which, like I said earlier, is meant to prove Erton theory correct. So, let's get started with it. Now, the whole goal of this proof is to prove that the space-time continuum fabrics are made up of small non-dimensional particles, which I call ertons. And the way I'm doing that with this theory is by using this equation, which is an equation representing the velocity of gravitational waves, which will always be the speed of light, and comparing it with this equation, which is the velocity of a wave in the ocean. The whole idea of this being that if I can find a congruency between these two equations, then that must mean that the functions that go along with them are similar in some way. The ocean is made up of particles, and if the ocean is made up of particles, which of course are just atoms or molecules, then the space-time continuum must also be made up of the same thing, which is why this is so important. So, what actually are gravitational waves? And to that, I'm going to explain to you. Now, gravitational waves can happen in a couple of ways. Imagine that this is the space-time continuum fabric, and this little ball here is some kind of mass. Now, if I were to drop that in, it creates a little bit of a ripple in the water. That's from an example of a gravitational wave being generated. Another example could be if I just put my finger in and swirled it around. This is adjacent to how, for example, two neutron stars, when locked in with each other, will swirl and sort of orbit each other until they collide, and that generates gravitational waves as a result. Alright, so that's essentially what gravitational waves are. So now let's go into the actual math itself. So this equation, like I said, represents the gravitational waves will always be the speed of light. And what I did is in both these equations I solved for one common variable, which is the amplitude, essentially. The amplitude being the distance from the peak of the wave to the asymptote, or the y-coordinate of the actual wave itself. So if you follow the proof and we solve for h, eventually we reach a point where we find h when h is sort of a null value. It can be any number. It's not determinable with the way that this equation is set up. You cannot utilize this equation to find the value of h, or the amplitude. Now, if we do the same thing in this equation with the equation for finding the velocity of a wave in the ocean, for example, h, which technically isn't the amplitude, it's technically double the amplitude in this equation, but it's the same sort of variable, so it still applies. Anyway, the crazy thing is, if you solve for h utilizing the same process, eventually you'll reach a point where you can completely cancel h out, and it results in v squared over gd equals v squared over gd, which is a true statement. 1 equals 1, essentially, or 2 equals 2. This shows that h is indeed, in this equation as well, also a null value. The fact that you can do this with both these equations shows that there is a clear similarity between them and their processes must be similar. Or, in other words, I'm showing that the process used in gravitational waves is similar to that in waves in the actual ocean, which I'm using as evidence to prove that the fabric of space-time is made of non-dimensional particles, or ertons. Which that then brings me to my final point. Is any of this actually correct? And to that, I have no idea. Now, while I am fairly confident in my math, I'm not an experienced expert, so I can't be completely confident in what I'm doing. And this is just math. There hasn't been really any significant testing to go and behind and back up all of this. Like I said, it's really just a theory. Anyway, so with all that said, I'm Shayna's Potato. God damn it. Remember to like and subscribe, and that's pretty much it. goddamn right. I swear to God, if he does it one more freaking... Stay on. Why? Why do you do this to me? Why, God? Why? Why?